JJ, one of the reasons that we talk about contingency plans for a Pitt or an NC State or North Carolina is because everybody has one, just like TCU had one 3 years ago when it looked like the Big 12 would fall apart. I'm sure the athletic department at Pittsburgh has had the discussion of where to next if there is a next outside of the ACC. But when Pitt fans hear Pittsburgh, Big 12, that's not as sexy as the Big 10 or the SEC. Let's start off here. Does it feel like the fan base itself would moan and groan if the only option is the Big 12 conference?
I think moan and groan. I don't think so. I think if that's really the only option to survive in terms of the Power Three, if something would happen with the ACC where it collapses, I don't think so, because you look at, again, like I talked about with the teams that are currently in there. I think what's really good is what will really help Pitt out, that where they don't have to deal with what really West Virginia is going through, is the travel. Yep. I think that, they'll certainly add teams like people that I think we look at as rivals in the ACC, the Virginia Techs, the Miamis, people like that, for instance. But you look at overall the Big 12, I like Oklahoma State a lot. I like Mike Gundy and how he coaches. Obviously, you have West Virginia. You got Cincinnati, two rivalries that we have there. We currently have them on the schedule with an out-of-conference. I think that the backyard brawl being renewed has been huge, not just for the city of Pittsburgh, not just for Morgantown, but overall across the country with how much viewership. The renewal of the backyard brawl brought over 5 million viewers. It's a good conference, man. And I think overall, I think that you look at it, the Pitt fans, they really wouldn't be upset if that was the last option. I think in a perfect world, would fans want to go to the Big Ten, where you're in Big Ten country, and perfectly, obviously. But I think when you look at, if it's really the only option left and you had to make a decision, nothing wrong going to the Big 12 and really having a conversation that says, hey, you know what, we link up with a bunch of teams from the ACC that go over to the Big 12. You're going to a good basketball conference. You can certainly battle in terms of football. I think the only way they wouldn't be upset is if by some chance that we were the only ones that would go over there with maybe one or two more schools. I think when you add really 4 or 5 more schools from the ACC, if they were to go over the Big 12, it makes the conference a whole lot better. You grab really big brands. You really have a conversation of really taking the Big 12 to the next level. I really think that's probably how I see it. I think the Pitt fans in general would be really happy about that if we grab more ACC teams that came along and said, hey, look at the battles and the traditions of what we have coming forward.
I don't think, Dennis Dodd released an article with CBS Sports saying there was an emergency scenario where Florida State and Clemson go to the Big 12. I think that is completely far-fetched and frankly impossible. However, there is that mid to even upper tier of ACC schools that the Big 12 will certainly go after in the event Clemson especially is officially out of that conference. That being said, JJ, you gave me a very positive twist. I was supposed to be on what was a dour question here. Is there a con then? I mean, is there one thing you point to and say, I don't want to be in the Big 12 because of X, especially if the ACC is still on rocky front?
I would say the only reason that I would say that I wouldn't want to go to the Big 12 is if it's just Florida State and Clemson that get out. I think that the overall brands in the conference are certainly superior. I mean, there's great brands in this conference. And I think that certainly you'll have a conversation that Oregon State and Washington State get added. You'd probably have a conversation with USF. But the minute you start to dive into potentially Florida State, Clemson, Miami, UNC, NC State, once you hit that 6 or 7 schools, you got to start having a conversation that says, hey, you know what, it's time to jump ship. It's time to get a hold of something else. I would say the only way that I would be upset about going to the Big 12 is if those top 2 schools really only leave and then we leave and then the money's the same. If the money's the same, it's kind of like, why are we jumping from one puddle to another that we're still in the same spot? We're going to another conference that's not part of the Power 2. Yeah. That would kind of be like a head scratcher to me, but that's kind of, besides that, I mean, that's really about it. I mean, that would be the only negative, but besides that, there are just plenty of positives.
Did you feel like with the addition of Cal, Stanford, and SMU, because at the time it was really based around keeping that number at 15 via the ESPN contract, the more that we've learned and that ESPN can back out in 2025, officially cutting ties in 2027, does it feel like that move with those 3 teams is less meaningful today than it felt 6 months ago?
Believe it or not, I keep it the same. And the reason why is because, you keep those schools in there, you add the numbers, and no matter what happens, if you had 2 or 3 schools leave, you're good. But then if the schools, let's say, hey, for instance, if ESPN does back out, hey, at the end of the day, they tried something to make sure they were in a position that, thank God that if something did happen, hey, that's what happens. But at the end of the day, I think it was a necessity move to where they were. Would you have liked to add, I think Stanford's an overall great athletic department, and in the Director's Cup, they do a hell of a job. Cal, maybe not as great of an ad. SMU really bought them, a way into the Power 5 or the Power 4, excuse me. But overall, I think that the ACC had to do what it had to do to keep those numbers where they are, keep the contract to where it is. But if they don't renew, or if they do cut the contract out in 2025, which we're going to find out here in next February, we're going to find out. Then, hey, regardless, they were going to go down regardless. But I think they needed to have a backup plan. They had to do something with numbers. But I just think overall, if they would have known beforehand about Oregon State and Washington State, I think we're having a different story in terms of which teams we were adding and whatnot. I think heart of hearts, you're probably looking at the ACC wishing that something would have happened with Oregon State and Washington State earlier, because it put them in a jam. You probably would have had two more better teams for sure. But overall, I think they had to do what they had to do.
Coming up, let's talk about that timeline of 2025 and ESPN cutting within 2027. If that happens, is it more likely the ACC is standing on even thinner ice than it sits upon now? This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Look, people say that I'm competitive. I am competitive. You can find me with my IBC root beer hanging out on the front porch playing Monopoly Go, or find me in my car, parked, not driving, also playing Monopoly Go. Take the classic board game that you play, that we've all played, and play it against your friends and beat your friends, or beat me. You cannot. Right now, you can do timed tournaments where you work together or work against one another to build up or tear down each other's boards. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to compete, albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Personally, my favorite part. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new. It's exciting. Every day it feels even more exciting because there's always these new events and massive multipliers for everything you win or even rent frenzies. There is something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, and it changes all the time. So get off the bench. Go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. It is Monopoly Go. It'll keep you on the go, competing against your friends, and I promise it's the most fun app that's out there right now. That's why I can't stop playing it. It is Monopoly Go on the App Store or at Google Play today.